The first scream echoed through the canyon like metal scraping across glass. It wasn't the sharp, practiced cry of a predator but the frantic, broken wail of the helpless. Lieutenant Mara Vey snapped her head up from the cracked data pad she had been trying to coax back to life. The others froze too, the mercenaries, the scouts, the local settlers, everyone on the expedition halted mid-step. In the silence that followed, the only sound was the canyon wind dragging sand against stone. Then it came again, higher, smaller, and undeniably young. "Cubs," muttered Rollin, the scaled quartermaster, his voice full of unease. His species, the fishery, were known for their hard pragmatism. "Predator spawn. Leave them." Mara squinted toward the jagged shadows where the canyon walls funneled into a collapsed den. Something in the cry, it wasn't just animal. There was terror, confusion, the kind of sound she'd heard from human children caught in disaster zones. She holstered her sidearm and started forward. "Lieutenant," called one of the settlers, an older Grinari with frilled head plumes that shook nervously. "Don't. Their kind don't live long without parents. The scent alone could bring carrion beasts down on us. Then all the more reason to check." Mara shot back without breaking stride. The group shifted uneasily, watching the human move into the shadows. Humans had a reputation in the wider galaxy: reckless, soft-hearted, disastrously stubborn. Their allies called them unpredictable. Their enemies called them suicidal. Mara had heard both labels enough to know they were true. She crouched low as she reached the mouth of the den. The smell of char clung to the stone, bitter and sharp. Fire damage. She slid her flashlight free, its beam cutting across scorched walls. The cries grew louder, overlapping now, 2, maybe 3 distinct voices. And then she saw them. 3 cubs huddled in the ashes of what had once been a nest. Their fur was streaked with soot, ears flattened back, eyes too wide for creatures so young. One limped awkwardly, a hind leg bent at an unnatural angle. Another bared its teeth, a pitiful attempt at a defensive snarl, though the tremor in its tiny body ruined the effect. Predators, yes. But predators without parents. Mara holstered her light and crouched further, letting her hands rest open-palmed on the ground in front of her. She'd learned long ago with feral animals, no sudden moves, no looming shadows. "Hey there, little ones," she said softly, her voice echoing gently in the den. "Easy now. Nobody's here to hurt you." The injured cub whimpered, a keening noise that vibrated in Mara's chest. The snarling one snapped its teeth and then promptly collapsed sideways, shivering. The third simply stared at her, silent but trembling. Behind her, Rollin hissed. "Foolish human. They will die either way. Better to let nature. Nature can shove it," Mara snapped, turning halfway toward him. "They've already lost their pack. I'm not walking away." Her voice had that human edge that so many species had come to recognize, the one that meant negotiation was over. She pulled a ration bar from her belt pouch, cracked it in half, and placed the pieces gently on the ash before her. The cubs twitched at the smell, noses wrinkling. Hunger warred with fear. Finally, the silent one crept forward, belly low, and snatched a piece. The others followed, too desperate to resist for long. When they began eating, Mara exhaled slowly, relief washing through her. But the relief didn't last. A low growl rumbled from somewhere outside the den. The mercenaries stiffened, weapons half raised. Mara didn't move, her eyes darting toward the canyon. Shadows shifted against the stone. Carrion beasts. Drawn by the smell of fire, blood, and helpless prey. She had minutes, maybe less, before the predators arrived. And now, like it or not, she wasn't just guarding herself. She had 3 cubs depending on her. Hours earlier, this had been a simple survey run. The settlers wanted confirmation that the canyon could support irrigation channels. The mercenaries were hired muscle. Mara had volunteered on behalf of the Terran consulate, a gesture of goodwill. Humans were always trying to prove themselves useful in frontier zones. Now it was turning into something else entirely. The first carrion beast appeared at the mouth of the canyon, all spined shoulders and dripping jaws. It sniffed the air and gave a hacking snarl. The mercenaries fanned out, muttering curses in their native tongues. None looked eager to stand their ground. Mara stood tall, shoulders squared, and turned back to the den. The cubs had retreated deeper, eyes glinting in the dark. "They're not leaving," she murmured. "So neither am I." She drew her rifle, checked the magazine, and planted her boots in the ash. The beast lunged. The firefight that followed was brief but savage. Plasma bolts lit the canyon, sizzling against stone. The carrion beast howled as shouts struck, but more shadows moved beyond it. 2, 3, a whole pack converging. Mara's rifle cracked again and again, her teeth gritted. She moved with the discipline drilled into her since academy days: controlled bursts, steady breath, keep your line clear. She could feel the mercenaries faltering beside her, their panic rising. "Fall back to the ridge!" one shouted. "Leave the den!" another barked. But Mara didn't move. Her stance widened, feet planted like anchors. If she left, the cubs died. And something deep inside her refused to let that happen. When the last beast finally collapsed, its spine smoking, the canyon fell silent again. The mercenaries were shaken, muttering curses about humans and their insanity. One even spat on the ground, glaring at her. "You risked us all for them," he growled. "They are predators. They will grow and kill. That is their nature." Mara wiped blood from her lip where a beast's claw had grazed her. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe they'll remember someone didn't give up on them." She turned back toward the den. The cubs hadn't moved, though their eyes gleamed in the dark. Mara crouched again, her voice softer now. "It's all right," she said. "You're safe." The snarling one gave a small, uncertain chirp, a sound halfway between defiance and trust. Mara smiled faintly. It wasn't much. But it was a beginning. By the time the group made camp on the canyon rim, Mara had carried the limping cub in her arms, the others trailing behind like nervous shadows. The settlers kept their distance, muttering about omens and curses. The mercenaries sharpened blades and avoided eye contact. But when Mara sat by the fire, the cubs huddled close to her boots, their small bodies trembling but unwilling to leave her side. The galaxy would not understand this choice. Humans were strange enough already, but taking responsibility for orphaned predators, that bordered on madness. And yet, as Mara leaned back against the canyon wall, she couldn't shake the thought that something important had begun. Because in that moment, when no one else would step forward, the humans had. And that changed everything. The cubs cried again in the night, their tiny voices breaking through the campfire crackle and the hollow canyon winds. Mara was the only one who moved toward them. The settlers turned in their blankets, muttering about curses and bad omens. The mercenaries didn't even look up, though one spat in the dirt as she passed. The injured cub was restless, pawing at its twisted leg, giving short, sharp whines of pain. Mara crouched, brushing ash and grit from its fur with careful fingers. The creature flinched but didn't pull away. "Easy, little one," she whispered. "I know it hurts." She pulled her pack closer, digging through supplies. There wasn't much: standard rations, water cartridges, a field kit with antiseptic foam and bandage wrap. Not enough for this kind of injury. She sighed, rubbing her forehead. Rollins' voice slithered from behind her. "Waste of effort. It will not survive." Mara didn't even look at him. "That's what they said about humans when we first came off Earth. And yet here we are." The Fishery Quartermaster bared his teeth in the dim light. "Difference being, Lieutenant, that you are no cub." "No," Mara said firmly, sliding the field kit open. "But I remember being one." She injected a measure of numbing foam around the break. The cub whimpered once, then sagged into the dirt, its trembling slowing. Carefully, she straightened the limb as best she could, then wrapped it in layers of bandage, finishing with a splint carved from scrap plating. When she finally sat back, sweat beaded her brow. The cub blinked at her groggily, then let out a low, rattling chirp, something closer to gratitude than pain. Mara smiled faintly. "Told you. Nobody gets left behind." The next day, the trouble began. Word had already spread down the canyon. The carrion beasts that had attacked them weren't a lone pack, they were scouts of a swarm. And swarms didn't just linger, they consumed everything. By mid-morning, scouts confirmed it. A mass of carrion beasts was following the scent trail into the canyon. Hundreds, maybe more. The settlers panicked first. Their irrigation survey seemed laughably irrelevant now. They argued to break camp and flee before the swarm arrived. The mercenaries weren't much better. Paid muscle had no interest in dying for settlers, or cubs, or stubborn humans. They debated abandoning the canyon altogether, leaving the soft-hearted Terran to her madness. Mara listened to all of it in silence, jaw set tight. She had learned long ago in crisis zones that fear spread faster than fire. Once it rooted, it consumed discipline, reason, even loyalty. So when they turned to her, waiting for her to finally crack, she didn't give them fear. She gave them orders. "We can't outrun a swarm in open ground," she said flatly. "Not with settlers, not with wounded, and not with 3 cubs who can't march 10 kilometers. If you scatter, you'll be picked off. If you stay together, you might live." "And what do you propose?" one mercenary sneered. "We hole up here and wait to die." Mara stood, pointing toward the canyon walls. "Stone. Narrow passages. Choke points. A swarm loses its advantage if it can't surround you. You hold them at a bottleneck, you stand a chance." The settlers looked uncertain. The mercenaries scoffed. Rollin hissed low in disapproval. But none of them moved to leave. Because beneath the contempt, beneath the muttering about reckless humans, there was something else flickering in their eyes. A sliver of possibility. A plan. Mara pressed her advantage. "I'll take point. You want out of this canyon alive? Then you fight with me. Otherwise, I wish you good luck on open ground. You'll need it." Preparation was messy. The settlers had no real weapons beyond work tools. The mercenaries had firepower, but their morale was brittle. The canyon walls, however, gave Mara the edge she needed. She walked the length of the narrow passage leading out of camp, running her hand along the stone. Sharp inclines, jagged drop-offs, overhangs perfect for funneling enemies into kill zones. She remembered training exercises back home, simulations where small squads held against larger forces, using nothing but terrain and ingenuity. Humans had never won wars with numbers. They won them by turning disadvantages into traps. By evening, they had constructed a series of barricades, improvised from supply crates, carved stone, and scavenged plating. Settlers dug pits and laced them with sharpened rods. Mercenaries strung tripwires for plasma grenades. Mara organized rotations, placing the steadiest shots at vantage points and the most skittish where they could do the least damage. And all the while, the cubs stayed near her. They followed her from ridge to ridge, their fur dusted with grit, their small paws stumbling but determined. The injured one limped but didn't fall behind. The snarling one tested its teeth on a supply rope until Mara gently pried it free. The silent one, always watchful, sat beside her as she drew maps in the dirt for the settlers. At first, the others tried to shoo them away. But the cubs kept returning to Mara. And slowly, grudgingly, the settlers stopped complaining. Because something in those wide, trembling eyes reminded them of their own young. The swarm came at dusk. The first howls rolled down the canyon like thunder, raising every hair on Mara's arms. The settlers clutched their tools. The mercenaries shouldered rifles, their faces pale in the firelight. Mara crouched low, peering into the dark where movement shivered between the rocks. Eyes gleamed there, dozens, hundreds. "Hold," she whispered. "Hold until they break the line." The first beast slammed into the barricades, claws screeching against metal. Plasma fire lit the canyon. Screams rose, mercenaries cursing, settlers crying out, but the line held. Mara fired in measured bursts, each shot punching through snarling maws. The cubs huddled behind her, pressed against the canyon wall, their cries nearly drowned by the chaos. Then the swarm surged. Hundreds poured into the choke point, climbing over their own dead, jaws snapping. The barricades shuddered under the weight. Grenades detonated, filling the air with smoke and burning fur. Fall back to the second line! Mara shouted. The defenders scrambled, dragging wounded, reloading weapons. The cubs bolted after Mara as she retreated, their tiny bodies darting between boots. The swarm slammed into the second barricade. For every beast that fell, 2 more took its place. And then the line cracked. A massive carrion alpha lunged through the smoke, its body bristling with spines, jaws wide enough to swallow a settler whole. It crashed through the barricade like it was paper. The mercenaries broke ranks, screaming. Settlers dropped their tools. The alpha roared, shaking stone from the canyon walls. And Mara, human, stubborn, reckless, charged straight at it. She dove under its swipe, rolling across the grit, and fired point-blank into its throat. Plasma seared flesh, but the beast barely faltered. It swung again, smashing her against the canyon wall. Pain exploded through her ribs. Her rifle clattered away. The cub screamed. The alpha reared back, jaws dripping. Mara staggered to her feet, vision swimming. She reached for her belt, grenades, knives, anything. But before she could move, a small, sharp cry split the air. The snarling cub, the boldest of the 3, had lunged forward. Its tiny teeth sank into the alpha's ankle. Useless against such a monster, but enough to distract it. The alpha roared, shaking its leg violently. The cub was hurled aside, tumbling across the ground. Mara didn't think. She acted. With a wordless yell, she ripped a grenade from her belt, jammed it into the alpha's open maw, and threw herself flat against the ground. The explosion shook the canyon. Blood and smoke sprayed across stone. When Mara staggered upright, ears ringing, the alpha was nothing but a smoking ruin. The swarm faltered. For the first time, hesitation rippled through their ranks. And in that hesitation, the defenders rallied. Plasma fire lit the night. Settlers swung their tools with desperate strength. Grenades thundered. When the smoke finally cleared, the canyon was littered with broken bodies, carrion beasts piled high against barricades, their blood steaming in the night air. The swarm was broken. Silence fell. The defenders slumped where they stood, too exhausted to cheer. Some wept quietly. Others simply stared at the human who still stood, battered and bloodied, at the center of it all. Mara knelt in the dirt, searching frantically. Her heart clenched when she found the snarling cub lying limp against the wall. No, no, no! She gathered it into her arms. Its small chest rose shallowly, but it was breathing. Barely. The other 2 cubs pressed against her, chirping anxiously. Mara stroked their fur with shaking hands, relief flooding her. You little idiot! She whispered, voice breaking. You nearly got yourself killed! The cub gave a faint, rattling growl, half defiance, half pain. Mara laughed, choked and wet. The mercenaries watched in silence. The settlers whispered. And slowly, grudgingly, the truth settled over them. The cubs weren't just predators anymore. They were part of the fight. And the human wasn't just reckless. She was their protector. The camp was quieter than a graveyard after the battle. Smoke hung thick in the canyon, curling into the night sky like the last breath of something dying. The settlers slumped against rocks, their tools slipping from exhausted hands. The mercenaries muttered in low voices, counting ammunition and injuries, too drained to posture. And Mara? Mara sat cross-legged in the dirt, the snarling cub in her lap. Its breathing was ragged, its fur matted with soot and blood. She'd patched its flank with foam, wrapped its ribs in bandage, but she knew too well that luck and stubbornness were all that kept the little creature alive. The other 2 cubs pressed close against her thighs, eyes fixed on their injured sibling. Every chirp, every soft rumble, carried both comfort and fear. Mara's arms tightened around the little one. She'd been here before, in crumbled cities on Earth where children clung to her after earthquakes, in refugee camps where disease claimed lives faster than medkits could save them. She knew the weight of fragile bodies that trusted her to keep them breathing. And she knew she couldn't promise it. She lifted her head as Rollin approached, his scaled features unreadable in the dim glow. You risk much for creatures that will never thank you, he hissed softly. Mara didn't bother looking at him. Funny, People said the same thing about your species when humans first offered aid during the famine on Suresh. The quartermaster's frills flattened. That was different. No. It wasn't. She stroked the cub's fur, her voice steady. Someone has to be first. Someone has to step forward when no one else will. That's how change starts. Rollins said nothing, but he didn't turn away either. That was enough. Dawn brought no relief. Scouts returned at first light with grim news. The swarm had only been a vanguard. The true mass was still coming, a rolling tide of claws and spines that had already consumed 2 valleys. If they stayed, they'd be buried under it. If they ran, they'd be hunted down in open ground. A no-win scenario. The settlers argued to abandon the canyon immediately. The mercenaries demanded double pay to even consider holding another line. Fears spread like infection. Mara stood in the center of the chaos, fists clenched. Every instinct told her this wasn't just about survival anymore. The cubs had bound themselves to her, and she to them. If they fled now, the swarm would follow. The cubs would be slaughtered. And maybe, just maybe, the swarm would spread beyond the canyon, threatening settlements for leagues. No. They had to end it here. We go for the heart, she said firmly, cutting through the noise. The swarm won't stop unless the queen is destroyed. The canyon fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, incredulous. You want to attack the breeding pit? A mercenary barked. That's suicide. Maybe, Mara admitted. But it's also our only chance. Kill the queen, break the swarm. The settlers exchanged fearful glances. The mercenaries swore under their breath. But no one offered an alternative. And slowly, reluctantly, the plan took root. The march to the pit was like walking into the jaws of death. The canyon narrowed into twisted ravines, the ground slick with the remnants of carrion feeding. Bones crunched under boots. The air stank of rot and acid. The cubs padded close to Mara's legs, their fur bristling. Even the injured one limped along, refusing to be carried. She couldn't decide if that stubbornness made her proud or terrified. By midday, they reached the pit. It yawned before them like a wound in the earth, a vast crater crawling with movement. Hundreds of beasts swarmed across its rim, dragging carcasses down into the depths. And in the center, pulsing with obscene life, lay the queen. She was enormous, her body a writhing mass of chitin and flesh, her swollen abdomen slick with mucus. Her head reared high above the pit, mandibles clacking, eyes glowing faintly in the gloom. The sight sent a ripple of terror through the group. Even hardened mercenaries faltered. Settlers whispered prayers. Mara's stomach turned, but she forced herself to stand tall. That's our target, she said. We take her down, we live. The mercenaries exchanged glances, then nodded grimly. The settlers tightened their grips on tools. Rollin hissed something low in his throat but began checking power cells. And the cubs, those tiny, trembling cubs, crept forward until they stood at Mara's boots, staring down into the pit. Not with fear, she realized, but with the same fire she felt burning in her chest. The attack began at dusk. Grenades thundered across the rim, tearing swaths through the beasts. Plasma bolts lit the shadows. Settlers wielded tools like weapons, striking with desperate strength. The defenders had become attackers now, fighting not to survive but to end the nightmare. Mara charged with them, rifle blazing. She cut through beasts left and right, her every step driving her closer to the queen. The cubs darted at her heels, impossibly fast, their tiny growls rising into a chorus. The swarm retaliated in force. Waves of beasts surged up the rim, their bodies crashing like waves. Mercenaries fell, screaming. Settlers were dragged down. The canyon became a battlefield of smoke and blood. And then the queen moved. Her head swung toward them, mandibles snapping, and she unleashed a shriek that split stone. Beasts redoubled their assault, frenzy in their eyes. Mara stumbled, deafened, but forced herself onward. Every breath burned. Every muscle screamed. But the cubs pressed against her, their cries cutting through the chaos. She reached the pit's edge, staring up at the towering monstrosity. Her rifle clicked empty. No time to reload. No time to think. She grabbed the last grenade from her belt, yanked the pin, and sprinted straight at the queen. The ground trembled as the queen reared back, her mandibles wide. Mara's legs pumped, her lungs aflame. She heard the cubs crying behind her, a desperate chorus that nearly broke her resolve. She leapt, hurling the grenade into the queen's open maw. Time slowed, the arc of the throw, the gleam of metal vanishing into darkness. Then reality snapped back. The explosion rocked the pit. The queen convulsed, shrieking, her head thrashing wildly. Chunks of chitin and flesh sprayed across the crater. But she didn't die. The blast had torn half her face apart, but her body still writhed, her abdomen pulsing. She screeched again, summoning every beast still living. And Mara, out of weapons, out of grenades, out of strength, stood alone at the rim. Until the cubs leapt. The three tiny predators, one limping, one snarling, one silent, darted past her boots. They bounded straight into the chaos, weaving between snapping jaws and slashing claws. They moved not with fear, but with purpose. The snarling cub clamped onto a beast's throat, buying seconds. The silent one dashed up a rock face and launched itself onto the queen's flank, its teeth digging into exposed flesh. The injured cub, limping but unyielding, scrambled after them, claws raking across the queen's ruined eye. Their cries were small against the queen's roars, but they carried a different weight: defiance, courage, the will to protect. Mara's chest seized. She couldn't lose them. Not after everything. With a guttural yell, she seized a fallen mercenary's plasma launcher. She planted her feet, aimed straight into the queen's abdomen, and fired. The beam tore through the swollen flesh. The queen shrieked one final, shuddering note, then collapsed. Her body convulsed once, twice, then went still. The swarm froze. And then, like a tide retreating, they broke. Beasts scattered into the canyon, their unity shattered without their queen. Silence followed. A heavy, impossible silence. Mara staggered, dropping the launcher, and scrambled toward the cubs. They were bloodied, trembling, their fur torn but alive. All three of them. She collapsed to her knees, gathering them into her arms. They pressed against her chest, chirping weakly, their bodies warm against her own. Tears blurred her vision. Relief washed over her in a tidal wave so strong she nearly sobbed aloud. "You stupid little monsters," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You did it. You actually did it." Around her, the survivors began to emerge, settlers with wide, stunned eyes, mercenaries who had dropped their weapons in disbelief. They stared at the fallen queen, then at the human kneeling with three bloodied cubs in her arms. And slowly, a new understanding spread. This wasn't just madness. This wasn't just human stubbornness. It was something else. Something dangerous and wonderful. Because when the cubs had been orphaned, every species had looked away. Everyone had said they'd die. But the humans had stepped forward. And now, because of that choice, they had all survived. The cubs had learned to laugh again, but laughter didn't erase danger. The predators had not vanished with a single fight. They had only retreated. The humans knew this, and so did the council that had once turned away. The question looming over every night's fire was simple: could the bond between human and orphaned cubs stand against a galaxy that had already decided their fate? It began with the silence. Scouts from the human relief ship noticed it first. The predators had stopped their raids. No howls, no shadows, no attacks for 3 days. On the fourth, a human named Reyes muttered what everyone feared: "They're waiting." That word sent a chill through the settlement. The cubs clung tighter to their human guardians. Even the bravest of them, little Carrick with his defiant growl, looked over his shoulder at the woods as though the trees themselves might attack. The elders whispered of a final hunt, one that predators launched when they believed victory inevitable. It was not a raid, it was an ending. The humans met in a circle of firelight, each with a cub curled beside them. Captain Alara leaned forward, eyes sharp, her hand steady on a datapad that showed the scans of the surrounding terrain. "They're gathering. Hundreds. Maybe thousands. If they strike, it won't be a test, It'll be an attempt to wipe every living soul from this colony. Then we stand, said Dr. Jian, who had never lifted a rifle until the cubs came under his care. His voice surprised even him. They're not just cubs anymore, another human whispered. They're our family. The plan that took shape was reckless, desperate, and entirely human. They would not wait behind weak walls. They would not scatter to the stars and leave the cubs to fate. Instead, they would meet the predators in the open, at the valley where the cubs' parents had died. If they think they can finish the story there, Elara said, then let's rewrite the ending. At dawn, the humans marched with the cubs at their side. The younglings carried no weapons, but each bore a mark painted by human hands, symbols of unity, of packs reborn from tragedy. Carrick, still limping from his wound, insisted on walking at the front beside Elara. The predators were waiting. They emerged from the trees like a living tide, their eyes gleaming, their jaws dripping hunger. The ground itself seemed to shake beneath their numbers. For a moment, the cubs faltered, fear thick in their throats. Then a human hand reached down, squeezing theirs. They're not bigger than us, whispered Reyes to the cub beside him. They only think they are. The battle began not with weapons but with sound. The humans raised their voices in unison, a war cry that startled even the predators. It was raw, primal, defiant, the sound of a species that had learned long ago to stare down extinction and laugh in its face. The cubs joined in, their young voices weaving with the humans, creating a chorus that rolled across the valley like thunder. The predators charged. The humans fought with strategy, not brute force. They set traps disguised as fallen logs, triggered explosives hidden beneath the soil, and drove the beasts into choke points where their numbers worked against them. Every shot was measured, every step calculated. Yet when the fighting pressed too close, it was human ferocity that broke the predators' momentum, fists, blades, even bare hands striking with the strength of desperation. And beside them, the cubs fought in their own way. They carried messages across the battlefield, dragged supplies, pulled wounded humans to safety. Carrick himself sank his small fangs into the leg of a predator that nearly struck down Dr. Jian, buying just enough time for the doctor to fire a decisive shot. But the predators were endless. For every one that fell, two more seemed to take its place. Hours bled together into a storm of claws and fire. The humans grew weary, their ammunition dwindling, their strength fading. And still, they refused to fall back. Then the moment came, the breaking point. A predator larger than any they had yet faced emerged from the treeline, its hide scarred, its eyes burning with cunning. The elder predator. The leader. It raised its head and loosed a roar that silenced even the chaos of battle. The cubs shrank back, some trembling, some whimpering. Elara stood tall, her face streaked with blood and ash. She raised her rifle, but she knew it wasn't enough. Not against that. And then, without warning, Carrick stepped forward. His small body shook, but his voice did not. He let out a growl, fierce, defiant, and possibly loud for one so young. One by one, the other cubs joined him. Their growls rose, weaving into the humans' own cries until the valley shook not with the predator's roar, but with the sound of a new pack claiming its place in the galaxy. The leader hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Elara fired. Reyes fired. Every human still standing poured their last strength into the assault. The leader fell, crashing to the ground with a final, thunderous cry. The rest of the predators wavered. Their charge faltered, their eyes shifted. For the first time, they knew fear. The battle ended not with victory songs, but with silence. The predators retreated, broken, dragging their dead into the shadows. The humans and cubs stood together in the blood-soaked valley, too exhausted to cheer, too alive to mourn. When the council ships arrived days later, summoned by desperate signals and urgent transmissions, they found a scene that none of their laws had predicted. Humans and alien cubs, side by side, rebuilding walls, tending wounds, sharing food. A new pack, born not of blood but of choice. Counselors stepped forward, robes gleaming, speeches ready. But the cubs ignored them. They ran instead to the humans, clinging to their legs, climbing onto their shoulders. One cub pointed at Alara and said the word in their language that meant, "Mother." Another called Reyes, "Brother." The counselors fell silent. For all their power, they understood in that moment that something greater than politics had happened here. A bond that no decree could sever. Weeks later, when the colony was secure and the predators gone, the humans gathered with the cubs for a final night of firelight. Alara spoke quietly, her voice carrying to every ear. "We didn't come here to be heroes. We didn't come to raise cubs that weren't ours. But when no one else would step forward, we did. And that choice changed everything." The cubs curled against them, some already drifting into sleep, their trust absolute. Above them, the stars burned bright and endless. The humans looked up at them and smiled, knowing the galaxy had changed that day, not because humanity had fought, but because humanity had cared. And somewhere, in the shadowed forests beyond, the predators watched and remembered. They had learned fear, yes. But more than that, they had learned respect. Because in a galaxy that had turned its back on the orphaned, only the humans had stepped forward. And that had been enough.